The day of the Beaumont quake, Laura told me she'd joined the hospital's disaster relief team and was leaving that same night. I calmly helped her pack, and just as she was dragging her suitcase out the door, I asked her, "Do you think you really know me?" She turned to look at me, frowning, not understanding what I meant. Like, "What's my MBTI?" I smiled. "Never mind. Just be safe." We were supposed to get our marriage license this Thursday. I'd worked overtime for more than 2 weeks just to get a half day off from work to go to City Hall. After she'd derailed my plans one too many times, I felt like our relationship had reached the end of the line. Maybe because I didn't immediately provide the emotional support she expected during this brief separation. Laura called me at 11:30 p.m. on Thursday night. It was like she just remembered that today was the day we were supposed to get married, her tired voice full of apologies. I stared at the blinking cursor in the word doc in front of me. I'd been sitting there since 10 o'clock and had only managed to type 2 lines. Only another novelist could understand the pain of writer's block. And just like that, her call scared off a fleeting spark of inspiration, just as every broken promise had before. I was incredibly annoyed, so my tone wasn't exactly warm. "Okay, I get it. Get some rest." I was about to hang up, but she quickly cut in. "The hospital's giving me a few days off when I get back. We can get the license then." A decent person wouldn't say anything to upset a doctor who was working tirelessly to save lives, but I figured it was better to make a clean break. Since my future plans no longer included her, I shouldn't let her disrupt my life anymore. "My work is important to me, too." "I don't think so," I said coldly. "My reasons for taking time off won't have anything to do with you anymore." "What does that mean?" she asked after a pause. "It means we're breaking up," I said, my tone purely informational. "We had a lot of good times these past few years, and no matter what, I hope everything goes well for you." Hung up, blocked her number, the whole 9 yards. To make it final, I even removed her as a Venmo contact. Over the weekend, I dropped off all of Laura's things at her old apartment. After changing the code on the keypad lock and deleting her fingerprint, I unblocked her number just long enough to tell her to go straight to her own place when she got back from Beaumont, not mine. Then I blocked her again. That night, Laura called me from an unknown number. Her voice was gentle as she apologized again. "Leo, it was wrong of me to postpone getting the license without talking to you, but I thought you'd understand. I'm a doctor first, and then I'm myself." "I know," I said, clattering away on my mechanical keyboard. "I sincerely admire you for volunteering in the disaster zone. But if you think our problem is just about postponing the license this one time, Laura, you're making my head hurt. If you're going to keep being this stubborn, then don't bother calling me. You're not doing anything but ruining my mood." Before today, I would have been willing to be civil with her about the breakup. But after seeing the news on my old company's social media page, everything about Laura suddenly got on my nerves. Even though the page was basically an entertainment blog, for a major event like the Beaumont quake, they dropped their usual copy-pasted gossip to focus on the disaster. Still, the person running the account was so used to writing fluff that they couldn't resist. Under a clickbait headline like "Race Against Time," gorgeous doctors team up for brain surgery, they were subtly shipping the hot guy and girl. The gorgeous girl was Laura. The guy was the subject of a note she'd written 10 years ago at a time capsule post office. "Having a crush is torture. I'm just waiting for the one I love to be single." I have no idea what was going through 21-year-old Laura's mind when she wrote that. But after finding that photo with her heartfelt confession on the back, a lot of her strange behavior suddenly made perfect sense. Ethan, Austin Medical School, class of '06. After graduating, he'd worked in neurosurgery at Capital General Hospital in D.C., where he'd been ever since. He came from a family of doctors, was 37 this year, 3 years older than Laura, and had started college at 16, so he was 5 years ahead of her in school. It was hard to find much about Ethan's student days on Austin Medical's website since it was so long ago. The scattered bits and pieces just said he was an outstanding graduate and that his classmates had called him a boy genius. But a recent announcement on the school's site said Ethan would be coming back to give a speech. The high residential photo in his bio showed a strikingly handsome face that gradually merged with the boyish one that had appeared over and over in the photo albums I'd seen at Laura's parents' house. The conclusion was obvious. He and Laura were childhood sweethearts. I'd been curious about the boy who appeared so frequently in those albums, from childhood through middle and high school, before his face seemed to vanish completely. At the time, Laura had casually explained he was just a boy from the neighborhood. Their families were close, so they took a lot of pictures together. They drifted apart after his family moved to D.C. Ethan's speech at his alma mater was on Saturday, June 29th. That day, Laura and I had plans to go browsing at a used bookstore. Early that morning, before breakfast, she was hesitant, like something was on her mind. Finally, she told me that a doctor she really admired was giving a speech at her old school, and she wanted to go see it. For some reason, I immediately thought of the announcement I'd seen about Ethan's speech. In recent years, the medical school had started live streaming all its lectures. I spent 90 minutes sitting in front of my computer watching the whole thing. The content felt pretty much the same as every other successful alum speech I'd heard in college. It was the usual stuff. The speaker's childhood dreams, how hard they worked in high school, their clear goals in college, and a few inspirational cliches for the bright-eyed students in the audience. He mentioned a few rare clinical cases from his career, but Ethan was still young, so they were mostly cases where he'd learned from his mentors. If Laura were truly interested in those rare cases, she'd learn a lot more from reading the papers published by those senior doctors. In short, I didn't think Ethan's speech was worth her time. But then again, they were childhood sweethearts. From the photos, they seemed close. It was perfectly normal for them to meet up for lunch and catch up after so many years. So, Laura, why couldn't you just be honest with me about going to see him? Laura got back in the evening. Beneath her calm expression, I could sense a hidden joy. She took the spatula from my hand to finish cooking. I leaned against the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, watching this tall, graceful woman. She even looked good just stir-frying vegetables. "What did you have for lunch?" I asked. "Hot pot," she replied. "With friends?" Impressed. She glanced at me quickly. "Why do you ask?" I smiled. A speech that could draw you all the way back to campus must have attracted a lot of other alumni. I figured you might have run into some old classmates. After a long pause, she turned off the stove. As she scooped the food onto a plate, the joyful fish that had been swimming just beneath the surface of her calm demeanor went still. "Yes, I ran into an old classmate. We talked for a long time. What about you? Find any books you wanted?" she asked, changing the subject. "Nope," I said, my voice tinged with disappointment. "I was just trying my luck today." Laura is a very smart and perceptive person. If she hadn't been so giddy from reuniting with her old crush, she might have noticed when she came back for her car keys that my slippers weren't by the door. That would have told her I was most likely home. I heard the door open and close with my own ears. Through the living room security camera, I saw her, a woman who hated driving, grab her car keys. Then, through my phone's app, I watched the dashcam footage of her driving Ethan to the airport. "Next time, I'll go with you on my next day off. I promise we'll find a book you're interested in." Ethan's home and career were in D.C. With two neurosurgeons living in different cities, it was hard to maintain a connection. The little spark of excitement from Laura and Ethan's reunion fizzled out with time. But soon, Ethan was coming back. I found out he was coming, funnily enough, from my own alma mater's newsletter. Austin Tech was promoting a lecture series featuring Austin's outstanding young professionals, and Ethan was on the list. Monday, July 29th, at 9 a.m. I didn't click on it to read through all the speakers. Ethan's resume was just so impressive that his name was right there in the headline as clickbait, impossible to miss. Monday, July 29th, was also the day Laura and I were scheduled to try on our wedding outfits. We had to pick out 5 total, 2 for the indoor shoot, 3 for outdoor. She was hesitant before we left. Once we were alone in the elevator, she said to me, "Leo, the hospital is holding a free clinic today. I'd like to go just for the morning. We can try on the outfits this afternoon." Laura's hospital regularly set up a booth out front for a free clinic, usually on Mondays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. As a southern city, Austin in late July is unbearably hot. Even early in the morning, the whole city felt like a steam room. Working a clinic outside an air-conditioned building was no picnic. Fine. She was a saint. I let her go. When she got back, I asked to use her phone, pretending I wanted to get a Groupon for Hot Pot, a new user deal, $50 off a couple's dinner. In reality, I just opened her Venmo app to check her subway history. Entry at Garden Estate Station, exit at Austin Tech. Getting to Austin Tech required taking the 2 line and transferring to the 4. The hospital was a straight shot on the 5 line. A moment later, I closed the app and handed her phone back. You should go to the afternoon clinic session too. Something came up at work, I said. She didn't ask any questions, just nodded. Maybe that was the moment I started to have second thoughts about marrying her. The receptionist at the photo studio had called earlier to say that the couple scheduled for the afternoon had a last-minute cancellation. She'd asked if Laura and I would consider swapping our morning appointment with them. Given how busy we both were, getting it done today was obviously the best option. I didn't ask for Laura's opinion right away. I just waited. I wanted to see if she could hold out, to see if she would decide to go see Ethan. I went to the photo shoot alone that afternoon. The studio, completely unsympathetic, said they wouldn't refund the difference for changing a couple session to a single. Pissed off, I ordered a 4-person barbecue combo all for myself. When I got home with the leftovers, Laura asked if I'd had a work dinner. I told her I was alone. She paused, then asked why I hadn't invited her. I replied, "You were busy. We'd been dating for 3 years, living together for 2. She knew that when I was angry, I got cold and sarcastic. She didn't put up with it, but most of the time, when she knew she was in the wrong, she would be the one to apologize. Like this time, like right now, I used to always go soft when she apologized. I'd tell myself that we had decades ahead of us as husband and wife, and fights were inevitable. If 2 people decide to spend their lives together, they have to be tolerant of each other. Besides, she was very tolerant of me in many ways. Now, it all just felt pointless. Her apology was, as always, sincere. First, she'd admit her mistake. Then she'd try to fix it. "I'll take tomorrow off. We can go try on the outfits together," she said. I put the barbecue in the fridge, then turned to look at her, my face a blank mask. It was as if she suddenly didn't know me at all. I like to have everything in my life planned and orderly. If a plan gets disrupted out of the blue, I get angry and frustrated, especially when it wasn't due to some unavoidable force of nature. "So I have to take a day off too? In your mind, your job is a real job, but mine isn't." Regret flashed in her eyes. "I'm sorry. I'll take a day off that works with your schedule." "Don't bother," I replied. "If you don't care about it, it doesn't matter if we do it or not." Before I went to my room, I gave her a heavy look and said, "You need to think seriously about this marriage. Why didn't I just break up with her then? Why was I still willing to give her another chance? Because my entire life plan was built around her. My original plan was to get the marriage license first, then lay everything about her and Ethan out on the table. I knew her. Once it was all in the open, I believed she would let go of those lingering romantic feelings, until I saw her and Ethan together in Beaumont. The night air in the Austin suburbs was exceptionally fresh. Ivy stood beside me, her voice so soft the wind could have carried it away. "So, why did you decide to break up? Do you think she went to Beaumont on purpose to see her old crush?" I shook my head and turned to smile at her. "Because fate is on my side." The photo from the time capsule post office, the headline in the school newsletter, the pictures from my old company's social media page, don't you think it's all a little too coincidental? I looked at her. My spirits lifted. All the gloom from my fights with Laura finally gone. And then tonight, I drove out here, thinking I could get over how much I hate driving. But I can't. You have no idea how miserable I was on the drive over here with you. I hate driving, and that's that. I haven't met anyone or experienced anything that makes it less stressful. So just imagine, when Laura chose to drive Ethan to the airport, in that moment, her excitement must have completely overcome her annoyance. So, Ivy finished my thought. So, everything that happens is for my benefit, I said. Fate is on my side. It's telling me not to wait until we're old and on our deathbeds for Laura to lie there wondering what might have been if she'd been brave enough to chase the one she loved. I know it's all meaningless after you're gone, but just the thought of her thinking that, I can't stomach it. Ivy was a Go player I'd met by chance, the world runner-up. We met at a bookstore run by a very stubborn owner. A $10 a month membership got you free access to all the books. The AC was fantastic, and I loved the decor and atmosphere. But there was one catch. No books could be sold or checked out under any circumstances. If you wanted to read, you had to do it in the store. In today's fast-paced world, very few people can sit quietly in a bookstore to read. On top of that, the shop was in a hidden location, so it was always empty. I only found it because I love hunting for books. When I discovered it had a lot of out-of-print editions, I suddenly felt like a complete idiot for spending over $1,000 online for a set of magazines that originally retailed for $20. After we'd had enough of the evening breeze, I was about to offer Ivy a ride home when she held up her phone. We might have to wait a little while. If you don't like driving, calling a rideshare is always a good option. I hope you don't mind me meddling. Talking with Ivy was incredibly easy. We were effortlessly on the same wavelength, and she always said things I wanted to hear. For instance, the day Laura came back from Beaumont was a Saturday. She showed up at my door with her suitcase, the dim hallway light unable to hide her exhaustion. I thought about how her apartment probably hadn't been cleaned in a while and how it would take time to either clean it herself or hire someone. In a moment of weakness, I let her in. As she stood frozen in the entryway, I said, "Don't bother with your shoes. Just come in." The shoe rack was already clear of any trace of her. "Do you want to sleep right away or get something to eat?" I asked. Her tall figure stood in the middle of the living room, the suitcase beside her making her look travel-worn. "You've already sentenced me to death. At least tell me why." I didn't hide anything. I told her I knew about her old crush on Ethan and that she was still hung up on him. To be honest, I wasn't angry that she'd liked someone in the past, especially since Ethan was such an impressive guy. If she hadn't tried to have her cake and eat it too, I would have just thought she had good taste. "I admit it," she said after hearing me out, her face expressionless. "I was wrong about that. We haven't been in touch since his talk. Running into him in Beaumont was a coincidence. We're both at a critical point in our careers. Volunteering there helps with our future promotions. You should be able to understand that." "I do understand," I said, not surprised at all. "And I believe you went to Beaumont to help, not to see him. You know me. I believe in fate. The fact that I saw that post must mean your story with him isn't over, and that you and I were just temporary. There's no story to finish, Leo. He's married. He has a son with his wife, Chloe. He's happy." I froze, looking at her in disbelief. "He's married and you're still pining for him? That's messed up." "So all your assumptions were just one big misunderstanding," Laura countered. "I was wrong to hide seeing him and to keep that 10-year-old photo. I'm sorry. Can we just move on?" Her pleading tone made my heart soften for a second. But I'm a stubborn mule. Once I make a decision, I rarely change it, even if it's the wrong one. That day, we had the biggest fight of our lives. The first 72 hours of a rescue are critical. 72 hours without proper rest, worrying about her emotional mess, only to come back and face a stubborn mule like me. Anyone would have lost their temper. She said, "Leo, we're not 20 anymore, where we can just talk when we feel like it and break up when things get tough." She added, "You chose to marry me for practical reasons. You say I want it all, but what about you? You don't know how to be in a relationship. You just pick a convenient partner for marriage, someone who can be useful to you. You can see how much I've put up with you since we got together. Why can't you tolerate this one thing?" It was as if she was trying to get back at me for every bit of frustration she'd ever felt. Watching her deflate like a popped balloon, I felt no pity or compassion, only anger and a sense of absurdity. "Then tell me, how did I use you for my own gain?" She pressed her lips together, silent. I knew what she was referring to. Besides my day job, I'm also a novelist. After I met her, I pestered her for information about neurosurgery and wrote a long-form novel about the medical world. It was successfully published and the film rights were sold, earning me close to $1 million. I'd done this before. My ex-girlfriend was a negotiation consultant, and I'd used her professional knowledge to write a book and sell the rights, a fact I had never hidden from Laura. "You really think I only date women to write novels and sell the rights? That you're all just a means to an end for me? That's ridiculous, Laura." If I wanted to, I could pay any number of professional consultants. I can write these workplace dramas, get them published, and sell the movie rights because I have business sense and talent. I'm not going to play emotional games with someone just for some professional knowledge. I'm above that. Yes, I'm practical. I chose you because of your family background, your education, and your looks. Why else would I choose you? Or do you think someone like me, from an average family with an average education and an average job, doesn't deserve someone as amazing as you? After blurting out everything on my mind, I watched her face grow paler and paler, and the last bit of affection I had for her vanished. Well, sorry to disappoint you, but I think I'm pretty great. I deserve anyone I want. I slammed the door and left. It wasn't until I was several miles away that I suddenly remembered it was my apartment. Damn it. Ivy found me in an arcade trying to win at a claw machine. When you're in a bad mood, it feels like the whole universe is against you. The more money I fed into the machine, the more impossible it seemed to win anything. I was so angry I wanted to kick the machine over. Ivy picked 3 tokens from my basket and started playing the machine next to me. You need a calm mind for Go, and for the claw machine, too. She handed me the strawberry bear I'd been failing to get. You look like you're going through something. Need someone to talk to? As an introvert, I usually process things on my own and rarely open up to others. But that day, I followed Ivy to a spot with a great view of the city at night. Whenever Ivy talked about philosophy or life lessons, she loved to use Go as an analogy. Coincidentally, a long time ago, I'd had an idea for a novel with a female Go player as the protagonist, but I'd always put it on the back burner because I had zero aptitude for the game. I recognized Ivy from watching Go tournament videos online back when I was researching. Maybe Ivy could provide the inspiration I was missing for this book. Sometimes I hate this part of myself, the need to be rational even when I'm feeling anxious and chaotic. I give the silent treatment. I don't communicate well. I have countless flaws as a partner. I admit it all, I said, looking at the distant moon, my voice stubborn. But she tries to use my flaws to excuse her own mistakes, and I can't wrap my head around it. Ivy looked up at the moon, its soft light tracing the clear lines of her face. A rose's thorns are part of its beauty, even if they prick you. In a relationship, 2 people should work through their issues and be tolerant of each other. That's the right attitude for building a life together. I know that, I understand that, but I still loved what Ivy said. Maybe someone like me, who wants to be dominant in a relationship, is only suited to be single. The second fight with Laura happened after work on Friday, near my office. She tried to use Ethan to persuade me to take her back. She said that the first time she met with Ethan after they both returned to Austin, she told him she was getting married. She insisted that as 2 people with families, every one of their meetings had been completely proper, with no lines crossed. Seeing nothing but frustration in my eyes, she grabbed my wrist in a desperate, almost frantic way, her own eyes bloodshot and terrifying. Leo, if you still don't believe me, I can have Ethan talk to you himself. That was the last straw. I shoved her away, looking at her with utter disbelief. What do you mean, have him explain it to me? What does he have to do with any of this, Laura? I loved Laura's maturity, her thoughtfulness, her stunning looks and graceful figure, her sophisticated, elite aura. But today she just seemed cheap and pathetic. It was like a beautiful illusion had shattered, revealing an ugly reality that was impossible to accept. I became almost hysterical. You're the one who kept breaking promises to me for him, who kept lying to me for him. It's because of your lingering feelings that you hesitated about our marriage. You call me practical? Aren't you? If he didn't have a family, if he were single, would you have come back begging for my forgiveness so determinately? You only came back because you talked to him over and over and realized you had no chance, that he wasn't interested in you. Now your career is taking off. You're busy. You don't have the energy to start a new relationship, so you figured you might as well settle for me. After my outburst, I looked at her with teary eyes and sneered, "We're both no angels here. Neither of us is any better than the other." She looked at me with an expression of disappointment and disbelief. "Leo, why do you always have to assume the worst?" Then she added, "Whether Ethan had a family or not, whether he was single or not, my choice would still have been you." I took a deep breath, calming the frantic beating of my heart. My expression was serious. I don't care. I don't care what you feel for me now, whether you've sown your wild oats and realized I'm the one you love, or if you've known all along that you love me. I don't care. For me, a breakup is a breakup. What's unforgivable is unforgivable. I turned my back and walked away without a second glance. I ran into Ivy again, this time at the movie theater. When I'm upset, I just want to find something to kill time. I was surprised to see Ivy there, because I knew she had hearing problems. I'd learned that from watching her tournament videos. She wore things in her ears that looked like earplugs. At first, I thought they were hearing aids, but after getting to know her, I realized they weren't. She read lips when talking to people. "Fancy seeing you here," I said, trying not to show any surprise about her being at a movie, afraid of hurting her feelings. "What are you seeing?" "Anything is fine, really. If you don't mind, we could be movie buddies?" she asked. I was a bit taken aback. A few of the movies out right now had great reviews, especially a big sci-fi blockbuster and a patriotic war film. Since it was a Friday, both were almost sold out. I hate crowded theaters, so I chose an obscure horror movie that no one was seeing. American horror movies can be so formulaic. It's always either a hallucination or some guy in a mask. Add in unknown actors, an unknown director, and a poster that looked like it was made by a third-rate production company, and the whole theater had a grand total of 2 people in it, including me. I knew the movie would be bad, but sometimes people do strange things. Today, I just felt like wasting the price of a movie ticket. "I think I'll pass," I said, holding up my phone to show her my e-ticket. A $10 horror flick can't compare to a $20 blockbuster. "Don't waste your money." I assumed she was there to see one of the big films. Then her eyes lit up, and she held up her phone too. The screen glowed. She was the other person in the theater for this terrible horror movie. How could 2 people be this in sync with their bad decisions? The giant screen in front of us was playing ads, but my mind was completely focused on the fate between me and Ivy. "What happened tonight? You look like you're drowning in sadness," Ivy asked softly after we sat down. I turned to look at her. A white silk blouse, perfectly tailored pants, her hair impeccably styled. She looked incredibly polished. She was even wearing a pair of thin, gold-rimmed glasses I'd never seen before. "What about you? Dressed so formally. A blind date?" I teased. She let out a soft laugh and looked back at me. The light from the screen cast a thin layer on her profile, just enough for me to make out her features. She replied with a rare, childlike expression, "I asked you first." The movie started, but the suspenseful background music didn't interrupt our conversation. I thought about how Laura had called me practical, how she said I always assume the worst in people. I asked Ivy, "What kind of person do you think I am?" Ivy thought for a moment. Rational, sharp, confident, brilliant. She trailed off, her tone apologetic. "Are you testing my limited vocabulary?" Her comment made me laugh, and my mood lightened. Suddenly, it didn't seem so hard to talk about the less-than-great person I used to be. Can you imagine that I used to be honest, awkward, and timid? I'd get all shy and flustered talking to girls, and if someone bullied me or took advantage, I'd just play dumb. I was naive about the world, with no defenses against anyone. The people who like to take advantage specifically target polite, gentle types like me. Like on a train, if someone with a top bunk wants to switch with a bottom bunk, the first person they'd ask is a guy like me who looks easy to push around. Of course, that exact thing never actually happened to me. The turning point, when I decided I couldn't live so timidly anymore, was on a bus one day. I had a seat, and this old man came up to me, cleared his throat loudly, and just stared at me. I looked back, confused. When I didn't react, he coughed a few more times, and I finally realized he wanted my seat. So I gave it to him, even though my heels were bleeding from walking to interviews all day. The thing is, that old man was perfectly healthy, practically bouncing on his feet. The people in front of and behind me were all in their 30s and 40s and could have given up their seats, but he picked me. I didn't want to give it to him because his attitude really bothered me, but I was trapped by social pressure. I was afraid that if I stayed in my seat, people would stare at me and whisper. The second I stood up, the old man shoved me aside and plopped down. Not even a word of thanks. He just gave me a disdainful look and turned to stare out the window. I just held onto the rail next to me, trying so hard not to cry. Later, my novels started to take off. Maybe money really does give you confidence. I gradually became more assertive and bold. It didn't matter if the other person was a man or a woman, big and strong or small and weak. If my own interests were at stake, I dared to argue with them loudly. I was no longer afraid of people or situations. I always felt that my transformation after being knocked around by society was a positive one. Even though my parents said I'd become aggressive, materialistic, and lacked empathy, I stuck to my guns. I was happy with the person I'd become. As I spoke, a wave of old hurt washed over me. My vision blurred, and the images on the screen became a mosaic. I hoped the movie's dialogue would drown out the catch in my voice so no one would notice. The thing I hate most is when my parents tell me that it's a blessing to be taken advantage of. Once, I booked a car to visit the next city over. We agreed on the price, the pickup time, and the location. But right before he was supposed to pick me up, the driver called and said my house was too out of the way. He told me to take a bus to the train station and he'd pick me up there, or else I'd have to pay more. I got into a huge argument with the driver. I was yelling and my mom overheard. She actually told me to stop arguing and apologize to the man, saying that when you're out and about, you should just endure things. I was so angry I just had to laugh. If I had to take a bus to the train station to meet him, I might as well just take the train to the next city and save a few dozen bucks. That's when I realized I couldn't listen to a single word my parents said. It was no help to me. After that, I moved to Austin, far away from them. Besides sending money and visiting on holidays, our relationship is pretty distant. I met Laura during my most arrogant, self-absorbed year. But whenever I was with her, I still felt insecure and introverted. She was just too perfect. That elite aura that comes from being raised in a highly educated family. That effortless confidence built by an upper-middle-class upbringing. That poised and gracious way she dealt with people, it was everything I craved. Before the breakup, Laura never called me practical. She said I was romantic and had good taste. As for my tendency to assume the worst, she saw it as being cautious. These were all positive things. I thought she loved me for who I was, my practicality, my independence, my clear-headedness. Ivy handed me a tissue. After I thanked her, Ivy suddenly said my name. Leo. Yeah, I said, wiping my eyes and looking at her with some surprise. She usually called me by my full name, Leo Adams. It was a bit formal, but her gentle, melodious voice always made the two words sound. I can't describe it. To say it sounded intimate and tender would make me sound conceited. Is it possible, Ivy began again, that you didn't like her so much as you wanted to be her? To become the person you admired? I gave a dry laugh. What kind of logic is that? I read your book, she explained. In the preface to The Mirror, you wrote that you've loved mystery novels since you were a kid, but you were too intimidated to try writing one yourself. Then you read Chin Zijin's high IQ crime and were blown away. You felt challenged, thinking you could write a great mystery too. And that's how The Mirror came to be. She even quoted the epigraph from The Mirror. A person has two faces, one that floats on the surface and one that hides in the mirror. That book, an ancient historical mystery. It's been a while, but I remember it as something I wrote when I was less mature, not very good. The only reason it got published was probably because the publisher was doing me a favor after my bestseller. No matter who brings up my work, I always light up. My books are like my children, whether they're brilliant or average, a hit or a flop, I feel a sense of accomplishment. Did you realize I set the story in ancient times so I could get rid of modern technology like DNA, cameras, and all the forensics, psychology, chemistry, and physics you need to know? I set it in a fictional world so I could make up the culture, geography, politics, economy, and laws. That way, I could make a lot of the mystery's logic work for me. But even though that book wasn't great, I still love it. Writing it taught me an important lesson, to accept that there are people in the world you can't surpass. If a person is constantly surpassing themselves, that's already pretty amazing. Perhaps hearing the excitement in my voice, hers became cheerful too. I've learned another one of your good qualities, she said with a low laugh. Perfectionism. After talking a bit more with Ivy, I learned that she often picked movies no one was watching to practice her lip reading. But she didn't need to anymore. She had new earplugs that could selectively let in some sound. She'd come today just to see what it was like to hear the sound in a movie. I couldn't quite grasp what she meant by selectively intake sound to describe her hearing. The movie was even more boring than I'd expected. The acting from the unknown cast was worse than some influencer a studio decided to throw money at. I thought about the ghost stories that had captivated me as a teenager and sighed almost imperceptibly. Ivy was incredibly perceptive. "What's wrong?" she asked. I was just thinking about a short horror story I read in middle school. It's been a long time and I've forgotten a lot of the details, but over the years, I've used the fragments I remember to come up with a different theory about the killer, I replied. Maybe because I was young when I read it, I went over it several times but could never figure out who the killer was in the author's ambiguous ending. It became a thorn in my side, something I still thought about as an adult. "That sounds interesting. Could you tell me about it?" Ivy said, changing the subject again. "I'm sure it'll be more interesting than this movie." Growing up, I rarely had friends who loved to read novels. Combined with my lack of social skills, I had almost no one in real life to talk to about things like this. Now that Ivy had asked, I was more than happy to share, hoping she might offer a new interpretation. A group of online friends, guys and girls, decide to take a trip to a remote place. One of them drives them there, and I think they have a dog with them. On the way, they hit someone. It was a short story from over a decade ago, so the author probably said it at a time when cameras and dashcams weren't common. Plus, it's a remote area. They decide to leave the person and pretend nothing happened, continuing with their trip. But after they get to where they're staying, 2 or 3 of them die one after another. In the end, there's one guy, 2 girls, and the dog left. They're all huddled in a room, and the dog keeps barking at something outside. They think the killer might be out there. Then, the guy decides to take his dog and go check things out. He never comes back, and the dog goes silent. Then the lights go out. One of the girls still in the room bravely goes to the door to find the light switch. She looks outside. In the dark, there seems to be a pair of glowing green eyes in the grass, staring right at her. That's the end. At first, I thought the man they hit on the road didn't actually die, and he came back to get revenge. But in recent years, whenever I think about this story, I try really hard to remember if I missed any details. For example, the dog's eyes were green. What if the killer was actually the dog's owner, and the last 2 girls were doomed too? If that's the case, the author's real point was about human nature. The dog's owner was afraid that after the trip, the others would develop a conscience and go to the police, landing him in jail. So he just decided to kill them all. I rested my chin on my hand, leaning on the armrest. I'd love to know if my theory is right. My childhood reading is a memory I always find joy in revisiting. It was 11 o'clock at night when we left the theater. On weekends, Austin stays lively until the early morning. As we walked along the brightly lit, still bustling streets, I turned to her and asked the question that had been on my mind for a long time. "This," I said, pointing to my own ear. "Can you tell me about it? I always thought you had a hearing impairment, but hearing aids don't look like what you have." Ivy seemed to have a lot of secrets, or maybe she was just a mysterious person. She stopped walking, blinked at me, her voice unusually captivating. "Do you really want to know?" I nodded. "Do you believe that there's a type of person in this world who has special abilities?" "You mean you have a special ability?" I followed her lead. "So what's your special ability?" "A sensitivity to the movement of tectonic plates," Ivy said, dead serious. "The Earth's crust is moving constantly. The vibrations from these movements are fed back to my ears as sound waves. It's very loud." I was stunned, my heart jumping between belief and disbelief. A moment later, Ivy burst out laughing. "So, how does my imagination stack up against a novelist's?" I didn't actually think she was joking. In this day and age, there are many unknowns just beginning to surface. "So, your hearing is excellent, maybe like a superhero with super hearing, but you can't control it, so you need to wear special earplugs to block out all sound?" I let my imagination run wild. "So, all those times I ran into you after fighting with Laura, was it because you heard us?" The smile on her face gradually faded, but her expression remained gentle. After a long moment, she reached up and removed the earplug from the ear not bathed in the orange streetlights. Only once. I heard your sadness and pain, so I wanted to see you. I'm not interested in any other sounds in the world, but I want to hear your voice. The other times we met, her words hung in the air at the most tantalizing point. The other times we met was because of what? I desperately wanted an answer. Her brow smoothed, like a gentle breeze, always giving off a comfortable, easy feeling. Because fate is on my side, too. So I always seem to run into beautiful things. I was so spooked I instinctively turned and ran. After a few steps, I glanced back at her. It looked like blood was trickling from her ear, staining her white blouse red. I had no choice but to stop. The first time I went to Ivy's house, it was as a journalist for an interview. Ivy had known for a while that I had a novel about a Go player that I was stuck on. She suggested I come over to her house to ask questions and get a feel for the everyday life of a Go player, saying it might help with character development. I agreed. After the interview, a notification popped up on my phone's notes app. 3rd full year with Laura. That was the content of the note. I had completely forgotten. Even though I'm a very time-conscious person, I'm also afraid that the heavy workload and anxiety will make me forget important things. So, I had recorded all sorts of anniversaries related to Laura in my notes app to remind me not to neglect the most important person in my life just because we'd been together for a long time and the initial passion had faded. I don't know how to love someone, and I can't even judge if I'm capable of love. All the love I showed Laura was something I had to learn and imitate. Besides the anniversary reminders, my notes were filled with a dense list of things I was learning to do to love Laura properly. Last time, Ivy had suggested that my affection for Laura might be because I wanted to become her. Seeing all this today, I think the answer is pretty clear. What's wrong? Ivy noticed my somber mood. Last time at the movies, you suggested that my feelings for Laura might just be because I wanted to be her. I casually held up my phone to show her my notes. I think, I'll never love someone like this again. The statement was loaded with meaning. It wasn't hard to tell that Ivy was interested in me, and I had been consciously trying to avoid it. But I didn't want to lose my friendship with Ivy. She was a very comfortable person to be around. I never thought the day would come when I'd be the one wanting to have my cake and eat it too. So I decided to follow my heart. Let others be bound by morality, I would be free. Do you regret it? Ivy asked, her voice tinged with a hint of sadness. Do you regret breaking up with her? People often say you can get through life by just turning a blind eye to things. Have you ever imagined what would happen if you had a weak moment, if you forgave her, and everything went back to how it was? You get the marriage license, have the wedding, and just move on without holding any grudges. Honestly, no, I said with a relaxed smile. Between a lifetime of resentment over one thing and a lifetime of sadness over one person, I'll choose the latter. My personality, for my whole life, can be summed up in one word: dignity. It wasn't surprising to see my books on Ivy's shelf. She'd mentioned before that she'd read them. But when I saw that all of my books were placed in the most prominent spot on her shelf, looking out of place among her other, more highbrow titles, I felt like I couldn't let things continue this way. Do you read fiction like mine, too? I ventured. She paused for a moment, as if searching for the right words. I wanted to understand. I got straight to the point. Understand the books? Or understand me? She was probably not expecting me to be so direct, her eyes widening slightly in surprise as she looked at me. Maybe I should be more direct. Do you like? Please? She cut me off, her eyes pleading like a puppy's. Don't say it. Before my second visit to Ivy's house, I had already decided to let my idea for a Go player novel die. We were in the study again. Ivy held up a slightly old book, which looked like a horror magazine from the cover. That short story you told me about in the theater, I think I found it. I read through it, and the killer is quite unexpected. Maybe we could discuss it. Her smiling eyes were filled with nothing but anticipation for me. I don't dislike her, but as for starting a new relationship, I think everything with Laura has just affected me too deeply. I asked her, aren't you afraid? Aren't you afraid that I'm only getting close to you to use your Go expertise for a book? And then once I've made my money, I'll kick you to the curb and find my next target? What if I could be your endless source of inspiration? she countered. I was struck by the sudden, overwhelming love that flashed in her eyes. I quickly looked away, staring at the spotless wooden floor. Starting a new relationship right after a breakup makes me look like a jerk. This gave both of us some wiggle room. I know, she replied. I'll wait until you're no longer hesitant. I will play my move without regret. Her resonant voice was like countless stones falling onto a jade go board, the crisp sound echoing endlessly. I think I have a new idea. Epilogue. The first time Ivy saw Leo wasn't at the bookstore. It was at the beach. She watched him, dressed in a green mandarin collar shirt, taking pictures on the sand. Her special ability was sensing and controlling the movement of tectonic plates. This powerful ability made her hearing extraordinarily sensitive. She had to wear special earplugs every day to block out all sound. Otherwise, the constant noise would damage her eardrums. That day, the deep sea was restless. She had been sent to investigate and happened to run into Leo. The sun glittered on the water, and the handsome young man ran along the golden sand. In the distance, the sea and sky met. Nearby, white waves crashed joyfully. He was like a god visiting the mortal realm, and just to see him from afar was a great blessing. The next time she saw Leo, it was at the music plaza. Leo was inside the bookstore, wearing a beige trench coat. He rubbed the back of his neck, then picked up his coffee cup and gazed out at the scenery through the bookstore's glass wall. The flapping wings of the pigeons in the plaza seemed to urge her forward. Unfortunately, as she entered the store, he was putting a book back on the shelf. Ivy took the book he had just put back. To her surprise, it was a copied manuscript of a Go master's notes. The owner of this bookstore allowed readers to leave manual comments, writing their thoughts, questions, or feelings on small notebooks, marking the date, and tucking them into the page they wanted to comment on. He must have been the only one who had borrowed this book. Every few pages, there was a slip of paper filled with sharp, pointed handwriting, full of questions and weary comments. She got a membership and borrowed the book, answering each of his questions below his own notes. For the next few weekends, she would come to the bookstore. For 2 whole months. The day of the first snow in Austin was also a weekend. Ivy came to the music plaza, holding 2 cups of coffee from the brand she'd seen Leo drinking on that first day. She thought that if she didn't run into him this time, it meant they weren't meant to be. Then, she saw him, sitting in the same spot, wearing a black coat and a gray scarf. The only thing missing from his side was a cup of coffee. She walked in, about to begin the connection that would bind them together.